In the dark waters off Corridor, the American theater commander huddles beneath a canvas dodger, drenched by the spray of the sea, while plywood-hulled boats navigate past the mine-laden areas, moving cautiously into the treacherous night seas patrolled by enemy forces. Brilliant searchlights slice through Manila Bay as four small crafts from Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 cut through the choppy waters. Their Packard engines are throttled down to minimize the noise and keep the wake short, allowing for stealth as they progress. Lieutenant John Duncan Bockley, a lean officer in the United States Navy, has already endured months of intense hit-and-run sorties. He expertly pilots PT-41 through the minefield, with a Navy mine layer coordinating the boats that follow. PT-34, PT-32, and PT-35 follow closely in a loose diamond formation. Their decks laden with improvised fuel supplies, minus 55-gallon drums affixed securely to the planking. Hand pumps at the ready, and hoses coiled like serpents across the deck. The operational plan is stark and straightforward. If a destroyer were to spotlight their formation and open fire, the flagship carrying the general would make a hasty retreat, while the other boats would launch torpedoes and return fire long enough to allow a break from the imminent trap. The wind lashes against the boats in hard gusts from the South China Sea, creating short, punishing waves that crash against the bows and spray over the cockpits. Within moments, the majority of the passengers become ghostly pale and silent, overtaken by seasickness as they venture beyond the bay's protective embrace. The general sits low on the starboard side of PT-41, clad in a field coat and cap, more shadow than man, under the intermittent glow of the hooded binnacle. While his wife and child huddle anxiously in the cramped cabin, the chief of staff braces himself against the whaleback. Every hour, the crew checks their bearings via dead reckoning and fleeting glimpses of the shoreline. Maneuvering carefully among islands that have transformed into hunting grounds for the Imperial Japanese Navy, sometime after midnight, formation becomes untethered in the midst of rain, squalls, and darkness. Radio silence remains unbroken. PT-32, short on engine power and heavily laden with fuel drums, begins to lag behind. PT-34 searches along the sheltering isle for the rendezvous cove, while PT-35 inexplicably vanishes into the night. As dawn breaks, a low ceiling of clouds lifts to reveal a narrow bay choked with mangroves and coral heads. At last, in the lee of a jagged headland on Tagawian Island, one of the boats finds the designated meeting point 2 hours overdue. Lookouts scramble to the highest point with field glasses, scanning for masts, shadows of aircraft, or the telltale white wakes of boats that would signal a destroyer's approach. On deck, bluejackets haul hoses to the drum racks, beginning the laborious process of hand-pumping gasoline into the tanks. Meanwhile, machinist mates pry open engine hatches, working amidst the noxious odors of raw fuel and hot metal across the channel. Another boat mistakenly identifies the low silhouette of a fellow torpedo boat as a hostile warship under the first gray light of dawn. Hastily dumping precious fuel overboard to lighten their load, a costly mistake that Lieutenant Bockley discovers once the boats regroup, revealing an oil-slick trail in their wake. The urgency of remaining stationary amplifies with each passing minute of daylight. Japanese garrisons hold positions on islands throughout the archipelago. With the nearest enemy airfield a taxing flight away at Davao, the general orders that the run must continue. Even if it means navigating a brightening sky under which they may be exposed, passengers from the underfueled vessel are redistributed among the two boats with sufficient fuel, while discarded gear is tossed aside. The formation cautiously resumes its course into open water, charting a path south and east towards Mindanao. The daylight journey is a risky venture, yet the sea smooths out, and the engines find a steady rhythm. By mid-morning, the spine of northern Mindanao rises out of the haze of sunlight and salt. The boats angle west toward a low shoreline where army trucks await to carry the group further inland to the Del Monte plantation. Inward, the Far East Air Force has hastily constructed rudimentary bomber strips in the pineapple fields. There, amid camouflage and palm trees, long-legged flying fortresses can take off from the Philippines, eluding the sweep of enemy fighter cover. Though the road is rutted and the airfield lacks sophistication, the Japanese are only a day's march away on the southern coast. Nevertheless, their arrival marks the completion of the first leg of an escape path wrought with uncertainty, adverse weather, and the habits of their enemy. Yet the air leg to safety is fraught with challenges. The long-range bombers assigned to northern Australia have been worn thin by numerous combat hours, carrying quirks that could incapacitate them at takeoff. Securing replacement aircraft proves to be a difficult endeavor, reliant on the reluctant approval of those in charge. When initial attempts to scramble the planes falter, the party must bide their time at the plantation under a veil of strict discretion. Word begins to leak through nearby villages that the American general has sought refuge in Mindanao, prompting local women to appear at the edges, inquiring about news of their sons who had gone missing in the fighting on Luzon. Guards grow tense, for the urgency of their situation cannot afford any further delays. At long last, 2 serviceable bombers arrive under the cloak of darkness. Landing on the rough strip illuminated by lanterns, crews conduct rapid checks, and baggage is swiftly reduced to essentials. In a bid for silence, the radio operator's seat in one bomber is converted into the general's position. Understanding that the flight will need to maintain radio silence as they navigate hostile waters, just after midnight on March 17, 1942, the bombers rumble to life, lift off, and ascend into a limitless sky. The route carries them across the arch of the Banda and Arafura Seas, maneuvering through treacherous weather and the constant threat of long-range interception toward the bare, red airstrips of the Northern Territory. They touch down at Bachelor Field near Darwin at first light, where the earthen strip are marred by the remnants of recent enemy bombardments. The party continues their journey by air and rail southward through the backcountry to Teroy in South Australia, where steam and dust hang heavily in the air, and a small gathering of reporters awaits at the platform. On March 20, 1942, the general steps down from the carriage and declares a statement that will become both a promise and a burden for the soldiers he has left behind. He assures them he has survived, and he shall return. Meanwhile, back across the waters, the Luzon front begins to fade into silence. On Bataan, tens of thousands of American and Filipino soldiers resort to scavenging for roots to stretch their meager rice rations, boiling murky water to fight off dysentery, and rationing mortar shells down to a handful per battery. The last reserves of quinine have long been exhausted, and the remaining motor transport on some roads is little more than a mule. Enemy artillery now spans the peninsula from north to south. The night run from Corridor has bought the general precious time and instilled uncertainty within the enemy ranks. However, the men defending the line along the Batangadak Road cannot feed themselves either. Within the caverns beneath the island's guns, telephone switchboards buzz with activity as reports continue to flow. Meanwhile, the tides of Manila Bay maintain the same rhythm they held on the night when the boats quietly slipped past the turning buoy, while the critical question of who will escape next lingers unresolved. On the morning of December 8, 1941, air raid sirens pierced the stillness over Central Luzon as pilots of the Far East Air Force scanned a bright blue sky that offered no omens of impending doom until Japanese twin-engine bombers appeared suddenly plunging from the sun in tightly organized formations. Within minutes, Clark Field's primary bomber runway was reduced to a pockmark-ridden strip of craters. Rows of B-17s were left ablaze where they stood, and fighter squadrons scrambled ineffectively as enemy aircraft swept in to strafe maintenance lines and fuel bowsers. Disorganization among the command and lapses in radio communication resulted in American aircraft circling other bases, while the primary target was decimated. By nightfall, the bomber force had suffered devastating losses. Fighter capabilities had shrunk to a mere fraction of their expected strength, and the enemy had effectively dismantled. The only barrier that could have contested the vital sea lanes leading into Luzon, the destruction of the Far East Air Force, stripped General Douglas MacArthur of an essential ability to dictate the opening engagement of the campaign, transferring the weight of defense to ground forces that were still in the process of mobilization. These forces, equipped with weapons ranging from modern standards to antique rifles, were ill-prepared for the challenges they faced. 2 days later, Japanese bombers returned with renewed resolve, targeting Cavite Navy Yard, igniting oil tanks, and dismantling the workshops that the Asiatic fleet relied upon to keep its shallow-draft gunboats and submarines operational. With the primary repair base in flames and air support vanished, the naval commander was forced to retreat southward, leaving only shore batteries and a handful of desperate motor launches to protect the approaches to Manila Bay. The enemy's operational objectives became clear. They aimed to position a field army on Luzon's flanks, seize control of the Central Plains, and ultimately force American and Filipino defenses to retreat toward the capital and the bay. Leading this mission was General Masaharu Hama's 14th Army, whose motorized divisions and armored detachments had been meticulously prepped for months. Meanwhile, American logistics remained tethered to peacetime limitations, unable to meet the demands of war. Pre-war planning had foreseen the geometrical shaping of this conflict, but could not account for the actual conditions of resource storage. War Plan Orange 3, drafted in an era when the Philippines were expected to withstand a prolonged siege, called for a fighting withdrawal to the Bataan Peninsula and the fortified islands guarding Manila Bay. These fortified positions were to be stocked with sufficient provisions, ammunition, and medical supplies to sustain a protracted defense. By 1941, the United States strategy had shifted toward a broader rainbow concept that emphasized beach defense and proactive engagement, resulting in critical supplies remaining dangerously close to the front lines in Manila when combat commenced. As the situation worsened, the retreat toward Bataan became increasingly perilous. Japanese amphibious units launched their attacks on Luzon from various points, keen to stretch an American defense that lacked the benefit of air reconnaissance. In the north, enemy convoys stormed into Lingayen Gulf at dawn on December 22nd. Landing elements of the 48th Division, complete with tanks and field artillery, on the beaches from Agu to Bong, thereby pressing onward to seize control of the Agno River crossings, a vital step toward dominating the Central Plains. In the southeast, Lieutenant General Susumu Moroka's 16th Division set its sights on Lamon Bay, targeting Mon, Ataman, and Sierra between December 21st and 23rd, thus threatening the Tayabas Isthmus and the roadways surrounding Laguna de Bay. The dual-pronged assault pushed US Army forces in the Far East to make a critical decision: either cling to fragile coastal defenses or withdraw into the interior, risking encirclement. Roadways became congested with ox carts, army trucks, and commandeered civilian buses as troops maneuvered frantically to ensure they were uncaught on the wrong side of a river when the bridges were destroyed. On December 26th, Manila was declared an open city in a desperate attempt to shield civilians and historical landmarks from bombardment. Yet military use of the docks and warehouses persisted, as there was no other means to deliver sustenance to those in retreat. Japanese aircraft continued to strike at will, casting a pall of black smoke over the Pasig River as headquarters sections retreated into the Malinta Tunnel on Corregidor. While rear echelons moved toward the Bataan Peninsula, the declaration of Manila as an open city did little to deter Hama's advancing columns, who were already encroaching around the capital towards key defensive points. What ensued was a hurried exodus of food and medical supplies from the city to makeshift storage sites on Bataan, which were ill-equipped with refrigeration, pest control, or adequate security. The supplies that did arrive proved insufficient, and the distributions were far from equitable. By the first week of January, the retreat was centered around a tenuous line of road junctions and rivers, the names of which signaled impending demolitions and nighttime withdrawals. The most critical route, the Leak Junction near Dinalupahan, provided the only reliable connections into the peninsula from the north. Philippine scout units and newly organized Filipino Army divisions stood their ground under immense pressure until engineers could complete the demolition of culverts and detonate charges, enabling rear guards to retreat across the bridgeheads while collapsing spans behind them. The 26th Cavalry, a mounted regiment of scouts, conducted delaying actions that bought essential hours. Just a week later, a troop from the 26th executed a mounted charge at Morong, dislodging an antagonistic force that had discovered a hidden route along the coastline. In every skirmish fought, lives were traded for time, and precious hourly gains transformed the tumultuous road columns into a more navigable network leading to Bataan. Once inside the peninsula, General Jonathan Wainwright, S. Northern, Luzon Force, and General George Parker, S. Southern. Luzon Force conformed into two combat lines stretching between Abuque and Mon, anchored on jungle ridges and tidal flats that appeared navigable on maps, but devolved into swamps of disease and mud in reality. Artillery units rationed their fire, ammunition was hoarded, rations were reduced to bare minimums, and medical officers witnessed supplies of quinine and atabrine dwindle as mosquito nets shredded without replacement. By late January, Thousands of soldiers arrived at 2 open-air jungle hospitals suffering from malaria, dysentery, and tropical ulcers, ailments stemming more from their harsh environment than enemy combatants. The 14th Army, too, was experiencing attrition, yet the marked imbalance in supply and the enemy's dominance in the air tilted the casualty rate unfavorably. The tactical landscape deteriorated further as reconnaissance missions uncovered gaps along swamp borders and dry riverbeds. Japanese infantry infiltrated under cover of darkness through dense bamboo and kogon grass, severing communications, maneuvering around established perimeters, and establishing machine gun placements in areas that maps denoted as impassable terrain. Counterattacks consumed battalion strength they were unable to replenish, leading commanders to withdraw to secondary ridges already within the adversary's sights. The coastal defenses on Corregidor and other fortified positions were equipped to engage naval threats rather than contend with encroaching ground forces among the densely wooded ravines. The jungle devoured signal wire faster than linemen could replace it, and functional radios depended on batteries rationed with extreme caution. With each hour of combat, ammunition, painstakingly transported into the peninsula, dwindled, and each transport of shells displaced much-needed supplies of rice. By January's end, the situation had devolved into something resembling a stalemate on paper. In reality, the conflict turned inwards. Approximately 100,000 Filipino soldiers and around 20,000 Americans crowded the narrow roads and bivouacs of the peninsula, protected by a dwindling number of aircraft and a shrinking supply of fuel. Soldiers resorted to boiling rice water to stretch meals, while others skinned carabaos to feed infantry units whose cooks had exhausted all provisions. Commanders redrew lines on maps, but the peninsula yielded no sustenance, and the waters bordering it were policed by an enemy air force that commanded the skies. Despite the relentless sound of gunfire echoing around them, each shot rang out like a bill coming due, a debt that no one remaining on the peninsula could settle without assistance that was not forthcoming. In the early days of February 1942, staff officers within the Linta Tunnel began to relay fragmented messages from Java, Bali, and the Sunda strayed a grim harbinger that cast any hope for rescuing Luzon as a mere political phrase rather than a viable strategy. These cables set the stage for a daunting decision in Washington. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to support our work and never miss an upload. Like this video, drop a comment, and share it with others to show your support and help us grow this historical community.